Belanda merupakan salah satu negara yang mempunyai ikatan kuat dengan Indonesia dari masa sebelum kemerdekaan hingga saat ini. Kedekatan ini menjadi peluang bagi kedua negara mengembangkan kerjasama di berbagai sektor, salah satunya adalah sektor pendidikan. Hal ini senada dengan yang diungkapkan Duta Besar Belanda untuk Indonesia, Lambert Greens, saat mengunjungi bisnis Indonesia. Berikut ulasan lengkapnya.
So about Indonesia, well, as you already mentioned, I was born and raised here, so I lived here in the 1960s, and then I came back here as a student to Bandung, where I stayed for 2 years, and now I'm back here as an ambassador, so it's good to always to be able to compare. So if people are complaining now about Indonesia, I say, well, look at how it was in the 1980s, or look at how it was in the 1960s. Indonesia has gone through a tremendous development, in my view, especially in the field of human capital. So the education in Indonesia has triggered a lot of expertise and capacity. Look at, you're around the table, mostly young people who speak fluently English, who have a much more, I should say, who are much more better educated than generations before. And that, I think, makes Indonesia one of the attractive countries in the region, or maybe even in the world, when it comes to investment, trade, but also in terms of the broader political, social and cultural cooperation. So I see this tremendous development here, and I'm very happy and proud that I can be part of that development. Well, you see human capital development. Of course, Indonesia has become now a upper middle income country, which is a tremendous difference again with, say, the 80s or the 60s. At the same time, what you also see in Indonesia is an increase in inequality. So some people are getting very rich and most people are not. So on an average, Indonesia is growing, but the inequalities are also growing, and that's a concern, I think, for every society, also where I live, in Europe, in the Netherlands. As a government, I think we have the responsibility to also try to limit the differences. You can do that through a tax system or through all kind of incentives. But that's also happening in Indonesia. So some people here are extremely rich, the crazy rich Asians, which we know. But more in general, I think that the challenge here is, I think, to also try to target or to reach the poor people who do not live in Jakarta or in the major cities, but who live in the countryside or who live beyond Java. Still, I think human capital, definitely a clear improvement, but also in terms of transportation, infrastructure. It's very cheap and very efficient now to travel through Indonesia by air, by road, the toll roads, such an improvement compared to the past. Shipping is still, I think, expensive. It's relatively expensive here, transport by water. But transport by air and transport by road and by train. I love the trains. Indonesian trains are wonderful, very efficient, in time, clean, cheap. Maybe too cheap, I don't know, but that's, of course, some people will not agree with that. So there has been a lot of improvement as well. I think if in a liberal society, there is sometimes the law of the strongest can go fastest, right? Yes. So the one with the best education or with rich parents, or they can go fastest, which I think in many societies is considered as normal or as acceptable. At the same time, I think for a society, on the long term, it's good to have a certain keseimbangan, equity or balance, so that everyone can benefit of growth, but also can contribute. For instance, if you invest in women and girls, it's not only a matter of politics and some normative decision of gender equality, but it's also about economy. If you invest in the education of women and girls, it will give a tremendous contribution to economic growth. So sometimes only betting on the few very rich people and thinking your economy will be run by that small minority of a country, on the long term doesn't work. I think it does work for an economy to have everyone capable of participating in the labor market and contributing to economic growth. That's also an economic point of view, not only a political or a moral point of view. Exactly as I said, it's very much an economic consideration, helping women and girls getting access to information, to education, to tools, instruments, work, labor. It helps your economy. It is one of the most powerful instruments for every government to boost your economic growth. Have women and girls being involved. So it's just what I'm saying. It's not only something you can say from a more political angle, if you want to help improve equality or equity, but it's also an economic consideration, and people tend to forget about that. I've seen studies that investing in education, good quality education for girls up till 16 years can help your economic growth with like 1.5% extra. So the investment in education, especially for women and girls, pays off with that extra economic growth. And at the same time, I am impressed by the economic growth in Indonesia, and I think that has, to a large extent, been possible thanks to the investments in education. So education has paid off already, but there still is much more potential for growth through education, especially through education for women and girls. Or think at the gender gap, the difference in payment between what a man gets and what a woman gets for the same job. In many countries, also in my country, if you level that difference, you will get economic growth. People will think it will cost you money. No, it's the other way around. It will benefit. It will generate growth. Yes, thank you for the question. We have for many years already had very good cooperation between Indonesian and Netherlands universities for decades already. And I think there are not many countries in the world with which we have so intensive relations when it comes to science and education. And I think the other way around also for Indonesia, the Netherlands is one of the most favorite partners in terms of education and science. We have dozens and dozens and dozens of MOUs between universities. Now, when you speak about education and scholarships like StuNet, there are different channels. Actually, most of the students who go to the Netherlands now pay their own studies, they pay their own expenses, or their parents, or the company pays, or the government pays, or so it's most self-paying. Every year there are like 2,500 Indonesian students going to the Netherlands. Short courses, but also masters, some PhDs. That's for learning and for education. But there's also a lot of cooperation between universities when it comes to research. That's very important because it's really a two-way street. Dutch universities are learning a lot from Indonesian universities and the other way around. And that is also going on mostly with funding from the universities itself. In Indonesia there's BRIN. Now BRIN also has dedicated a lot of funding for this research cooperation, with the Netherlands. We had our Dutch Minister of Research and Education here last July. He met with Brin, with Pa Handoko. He also met, of course, with Pa Nadim, the Minister of Education and Research. He met with many universities. So there's both in terms of education and in terms of research, very, very strong cooperation. Now, we are going to launch a new program on top of that this year. It will be a long-term project for 10 years. So I'm very happy that it will be long-term, so not just for 2 years or 3 years or 10 years, cooperation between Indonesia and the Netherlands in the field of both education and research. 50% is for scholarships and 50% is for capacity building and in-depth studies, such as PhD or the high level research. We are still, as we speak, we are still trying to find out what is the priority sector. It will not be for everything, but maybe agriculture or climate or rule of law. So we are still now having talks with Indonesian government, with universities, with the private sector to find out. Of course, there's a lot of cooperation when we speak about education and research, but also between universities, between companies. We have been very active, and I think we still are very active in the maritime sector in particular. If you look, for instance, at training specifically of Indonesian crew, we are supporting this in Bogor. There is a training institute on how to maneuver ships, like in a port with a limited room, like a tugboat or a very highly advanced ships. There's a training center in Bogor. I don't know why in Bogor, but it's in Bogor. They don't have sea there, but anyway, it's in Bogor, and our Prime Minister visited that center 3 years ago.
From IPC.
Maybe it's
IPC.
Yeah.
International Port Corporation.
We work through big Dutch companies with the Surabaya port sector in helping build ships. So it's a Dutch company called Damen. They have already supported the Indonesian Navy in building 2 frigates, huge, the biggest ships I think Indonesia have, one of the biggest ships. Port of Rotterdam is very active here in terms of port development in many places, but also the dredgers, those who make access to ports. How should I say? They basically clean the access road to the port. So for ports, dredgers are always indispensable. They are maybe you cannot in countries like Indonesia or the Netherlands, you cannot live without dredging. We're always dredging because if not, the rivers will block the access to the port. And then, if I can go a little bit beyond the maritime sector, but if you look at water management, obviously there are dozens and dozens of Dutch companies active here in Indonesia, mostly in the field of consultancy, advice, design, engineering, and many of them also providing highly advanced technological solutions. Here in Jakarta, I live here as well, so I say we, but we are facing the challenges of land subsidence because of groundwater extraction, combined with flooding, the banjirs, combined with ROP, so the possibility of flooding from the sea, the sea level rise. We see the problem of pollution in the rivers, which is blocking the discharge of water. We see that there's a problem at the source, like in the Puncak, where there are now many trees being cut and houses being built, so the runoff of the water goes much faster. So there's a complex issue here of water, and the Banjir is not just a lot of rain, it's also because of other factors. Well, that's typically an example where the Dutch have had experience for like 700 years already. So we've been dealing with the problem for quite some time. So yeah, there are solutions as well, and that's what we are discussing between governments. We have a very close relation with PUPR, also with DKI, also with other cities such as Semarang or the province of Jawa Tengah, on land subsidence near Semarang, the Demak area, where we are supporting the Indonesian government with mangrove planting and mangrove nature-based solutions. I can talk for hours on this subject because the point is, what I want to say is every problem you see, it's in my country like in Indonesia, is multidimensional. You cannot just have one solution for one problem. Normally you have to do research behind the problem, what is behind the problem, and then you will see different factors. And that means you should not only look at one particular solution, but look at also the social element, people behavior. Look at the traffic. People's behavior is very much a reason for traffic jams. It's not only that you have to widen the road, it's about people's behavior, right? Why do people not take the bus, but they prefer the car or the motor? Why don't people, there are now very nice bicycle lanes in Jakarta, but they're empty. It's a very nice question. Why do they not use the bicycle lanes? So there's research behind that, all right? So there's a lot of technology and a lot of knowledge available, for instance, in my country. And so we are sharing that through university cooperation. And we are also very much ready and willing to contribute also to the discussion in Indonesia on these kind of broader challenges which we are facing.
And based on the